In this video, we're going to talk about Metamorphosis after this. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd, and today we're going to talk about the first time that Zephram Cochrane is mentioned in the original series. Now, I didn't remember a lot of this. Cochrane was marooned on this asteroid-sized planet along with an entity called the Companion. And many people have said that when first contact was made, they show Zephram Cochrane as an old man, whereas he's seen many years later, 150 years later, in fact, as a young man. And they do actually explain in this episode that Cochrane was in his 80s when he was trying to just get himself lost. His ship was then seized by this companion and brought to this small planet, who rejuvenated him to a younger age of mid-30s, let's say, and held him at that for 150 years. So it actually clears up that whole thing before we have to do any kind of retconning. So let's talk about that. First of all, though, Cochrane doesn't know anything about the Federation. Then the characters, Kirk and McCoy especially, say there's something about this guy that looks familiar, but not quite. And even knowing his last name, Cochrane, don't quite get the connection. That seems kind of slow, especially for those two. Nevertheless, it's mainly for the fans' purposes of not being able to reveal who he really was before the time comes in the story. So we'll let them have that. So an 87-year-old that's made back into a 30-year-old and then given immortality where he doesn't age at all over 150 years. And that's how we have Zephram Cochrane as a young man when the next time we see him in First Contact, he is an older man. Now, does he look a whole lot like the actor Glenn Corbett plays in this episode? Does not necessarily preclude me from thinking that James Cromwell in First Contact couldn't be the same person at different ages. So, and concerning the enlightenment that our original series Cochrane had, as opposed to the much more cynical, borderline alcoholic that the Cochrane in First Contact was depicted, one could think that 150 years of clean living may have done something good for him, that he may have changed. And in fact, it was suggested in the last episode of Enterprise that Cochrane became more of what he was legendarily thought of later in his life, not at the point to where he was first developing the warp ship. Nevertheless, they also say in this episode that he invented warp speed, or the warp effect. I'm not quite sure exactly the wording that they used on that, but that could have been Kirk just saying kind of shorthand for Earth, seeing that much of what is talked about is very Earth-centric on the Enterprise crew during that time anyway. So it fits in with what is done later. A lot of it made, of course, just to make a better movie. But at the same time, I don't think that they were terribly disrespectful of the character that was created here. They do call him Zephram Cochrane of Alpha Centauri. Once again, we don't really know what happened to Cochrane between the time of his first launch and the subsequent life that he had. Obviously, he lived to be 87. So in the show that we see here is someone probably in his 50s. Let's say that he's in his 50s. And so he has another 30 years to have moved, say, to Alpha Centauri. We don't really know about that, and maybe we can retcon that, but that's how it works. They mentioned in this episode for the first time how many planets have been discovered since the Federation put ships into space, 1,000 planets and spreading. So it's an interesting episode to watch, not really because of what the plot was. It's your usual different life form that is not what it seems. It looks to be a menace at first, but actually turns out to be friendly, and then and misunderstood. The one interesting thing is the delegate Hedford, who is supposed to be stopping a war of another planet. You kind of wonder if she could stop a war anywhere because her whole demeanor was very negative. What's going on here? Why didn't you do this? It's another more of the 60s sexism that inundated this series, and virtually everything else was produced during that time. There is one scene in there where she regrets having a work life and not a love life. And once again, kind of sexist, but it does at least suggest something. People in the workplace, and this is men and women both, that devote themselves to their jobs to the extent that they develop no other life. They don't have friends outside of work. They don't have activities outside of work. Everything is work, especially in the United States, where people from other countries have said, we work to live, you Americans live to work. There is a certain amount of that, and it's addressed here. I'm once again, they managed to shoot her mostly like they did all the other characters, except in the very last scene where she is coming on to Cochrane, and then they put it back in the soft focus. They love to use that soft focus lens just for the women, and just an extreme close-up to show that there is love in the air. And Cochrane is willing to continue being out of the galaxy, essentially, for love, and willing to live out the remainder of his days, another 40 years at least, with just one person, and trying to make it on growing his own crops. So I hope kind of that at least the Enterprise left him a communicator just in case he changed his mind. Or, some kind of replicator, if they had them by that time, would be kind of helpful too. But that's details that weren't included in this show. So I'd like to know what you think about Metamorphosis. I think it was a show that mostly holds up, and it does fit in with Star Trek canon better than I thought after the events of First Contact. I'd like to know what you think about it, however, and you can do that by making it known through making a comment below. And of course, while you're below, if you will subscribe and also like the channel, that'll help us out as well. So, we are now doing retro reviews on Star Trek, the original series, and also on Deep Space Nine. We had our first episode up already, and we'll be doing more in the coming weeks. Also, in a couple of weeks, we will be starting up with the new Strange New Worlds Season 2, and we're looking forward to talking to you about that. And until those things happen, don't go far.